Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Before we start, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I'd love to know how far my story has traveled. Now get ready, because what you're about to hear isn't your average fiction. It's a story that could happen in any house, at any dinner, behind any smile. There are betrayals that kill in silence and others that prefer to do so with a spoon in hand. Claire was a 38-year-old woman. Quiet, strong out of necessity, not by choice. Her gaze was one of those that learned to speak without moving her lips. From afar, anyone would say she led a tranquil life. Married, mother of two, owner of a spacious house decorated with Christmas lights since November. But no one knew what was really happening behind those white brick walls. Claire didn't live, she endured. The house was adorned with garlands, a tree full of golden baubles, scented candles, and that artificial pine scent mixing with the smell of dinner. The table was already set, the porcelain dinnerware inherited from her mother-in-law, the tall glasses waiting for the toast. At 11 p.m., the family was gathered, toasting to another night, feigning love as always. But that night, something broke in Claire's chest, as if her soul was stirring for no clear reason. She slowly got up from the bed with that uncomfortable feeling in her chest, the one you can't explain. The clock read 11:43 p.m. There was no noise in the house, except for a spoon slowly clinking in the kitchen. She went down the stairs without making a sound. Barefoot, in the blue flannel robe her adopted mother gave her for her 30th birthday. In the reflection of the banister, she saw a shadow moving in the kitchen. She thought it was her mother-in-law, who as always would be criticizing the seasoning of the stew or the cheap wine she herself had brought, but it wasn't. It was Julian, her husband, her life partner for over a decade. Claire peeked around the corner and watched in silence. With a dim light on, Julian was hunched over the pot of her famous Christmas soup. He took a white envelope from his inner pocket, opened it with a precise, almost surgical motion, and poured a translucent powder into Claire's soup. She didn't want to believe it. She thought she was dreaming, but her own ears confirmed the nightmare. This will make it look like a heart attack. She'll go fast. No one will suspect a thing, he said in a whisper so cold it sent a chill through every cell of her skin. Claire didn't move. She felt as if her soul had left her body and was floating, observing him from outside. She wanted to scream, but her voice hid behind her fear. It wasn't just the fear of dying. It was the fear of accepting that the man with whom she shared her life wanted her dead. She leaned against the wall, closed her eyes, felt a hot tear slide down her cheek, but made no sound. She wiped it away quickly, took a deep breath, and made a decision. She went back up the stairs slowly, entered her room, and waited a few minutes. She wasn't trembling, she wasn't crying, she was just thinking, calculating. When she came back down, ready to serve the soup, her face showed no trace of what she knew. She smiled as she always did. She greeted everyone as usual. She looked at Julian, who was pretending to be the perfect husband, hugging their children and handing a glass to his mother, Mrs. Estelle. "Claire, honey, is the soup ready?" the woman asked with that dry tone she'd used since day one. "Almost, it's nice and hot, just the way you like it," she replied with a firm voice. She went into the kitchen. The steaming bowls were already served. She knew which one was hers. She recognized it by the small golden-handled spoon she always used. She took it and, without a second thought, switched it. She placed the soup in front of Mrs. Estelle. She sat down in front of her own bowl, watching in silence. Julian sat next to his mother. No one noticed anything strange. The toast was emotional, the laughs feigned, the food was served. The spoons began to move. The warmth of the night seemed gentle, but the cold Claire felt inside was incomparable. The silence of the first sips was broken by her mother-in-law's voice. "This soup turned out good, huh? Though it's a little lacking in salt." And then everything happened fast, very fast. The woman dropped her spoon, clutching her chest. Her face tensed. Her breathing became erratic. "Mom," Julian said, his voice breaking. The woman was already doubled over, her eyes wide with terror. "Mom! Oh, Mom, please!" he yelled, now standing and shaking her. Claire watched him, staring directly without blinking. The children started to cry. Her sister-in-law called for an ambulance. Claire didn't move. Her bowl remained untouched. The room filled with chaos. Julian held her, weeping with a distorted face. But Claire couldn't stop thinking about what she had heard. That phrase whispered with surgical coldness, that white envelope, that invisible poison. It all happened in front of the nativity scene, in front of the illuminated tree, in front of a cross hanging over the door. It all happened in front of God, and Claire knew he had seen everything. She stayed silent, and in that silence, another woman was born. A woman who no longer trusted anyone, not her husband, not the family that had surrounded her for years, not that love she thought was eternal. All she had left was her faith. All she had left was the certainty that what she had witnessed was not a product of tiredness. It was real. Hours later, at the hospital, the doctor came out with a serious expression. Julian got up instantly. "How is my mother?" "I'm sorry, we couldn't do anything." Claire closed her eyes, not shedding a single tear. She only thought of everything that woman had said to her in life, every time she humiliated her, treated her like an intruder in her own home, how she referred to her as that classless woman. And yet, she didn't wish this on her. Not this way. "What happened?" Julian asked with a broken voice. "We'll need to perform an autopsy. It's protocol when someone passes away suddenly at a dinner. Just routine. We'll let you know," the doctor said, unaware that she had just set off a time bomb. Upon returning home, Claire got the children ready for bed. She hugged them tightly, sang them a song her adopted mother used to sing. She stroked their hair, kissed them more than once. She had a feeling nothing would ever be the same. Julian watched her from the doorway. His face looked sad. His voice was barely a whisper. "I can't believe my mom is gone. How are you doing?" Claire looked at him. It was a long, deep, empty gaze. "I'm fine. Just tired." "You didn't eat anything," he insisted. "I wasn't hungry," she replied, knowing that tonight she had been served the bitterest dinner of her life. Julian came closer, trying to take her hand. Claire gently pulled it away. "I'm going to sleep with the kids tonight. I don't want them to be alone," she said in a serene voice. He nodded, not arguing. Claire knew something inside him was starting to feel uneasy. Maybe he intuited that she had seen more than she let on. Or maybe not. What was certain was that the old Claire no longer existed. And while the children slept, she prayed in silence. She didn't ask for vengeance. She asked for clarity, for light, because she knew that what she had witnessed couldn't remain buried. That night, in front of the still-lit Christmas tree, with the lights blinking like mute witnesses to the tragedy, Claire made the most important decision of her life. To remain silent for now, to wait, to observe. And when the time came, to seek justice her own way, in front of men and in the eyes of God. The dawn seemed endless. The Christmas tree lights flickered like a secret code only Claire could decipher. Her children slept soundly with a peace she never knew. As she stroked her younger son's hair, a whirlwind of memories began to flood her mind. She couldn't sleep. Insomnia was an old friend that returned just when she needed strength the most. Her body was in that room, but her mind traveled back, far back, to the cold hallways of the orphanage where she grew up. She was 5 when they left her there. She didn't remember faces, only the smell of bleach, the worn gray walls, the metal beds with thin mattresses. Everything else was a blur. Sometimes she dreamed of a dark-haired woman who hugged her in silence, but she never knew if it was real or an invention of her mind, hungry for affection. She didn't know her last name. She didn't know where she came from. She only knew that no one ever came back for her. At 7, she learned to be tough so the other girls wouldn't make fun of her. At 10, she already knew how to hide her things so they wouldn't get stolen. At 12, she understood there were 2 types of adults: those who ignored the pain of others and those who caused it directly. And both were abundant in that place. There was a hallway at the back of the orphanage that no girl wanted to enter. A door with no window. The girls knew that if a caretaker called your name and said Father Ortega was waiting for you, it was best to feign a fever. Claire went through that door twice. She never talked about it. She learned to be silent. She learned to pretend it didn't hurt. She learned to survive without crying. At 16, when her body was starting to change and men looked at her differently, she was adopted by a couple who seemed sweet. He was an older businessman, and she was an elegant woman, always made up and absent. They said they wanted to give her a new life. What they didn't say was that they needed someone to cook, clean, and care for the sick grandfather who lived with them. Claire spent hours in the kitchen taking orders, enduring complaints, and sleeping on a mattress on the floor next to the laundry room. They never took her to school. They never celebrated a birthday for her. They called her Claire when they needed something and useless when something went wrong. It was there she met Julian. He was the eldest son of a neighbor who came over often. He was 21, had a disarming smile, and a way of talking that made her feel seen for the first time. He was handsome, confident, attentive. She looked at him as one looks at a refuge. One night, as she was taking out the trash, he approached her. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly, looking at her with those eyes that seemed to know everything. "I have no other place to go." she replied, not knowing why she was telling this to a virtual stranger. You would with me, he added without a pause. You need me, Claire. With me, you'll have a future. And Claire believed him because she needed to believe, because she knew no other option, because her soul was thirsty for someone just once to choose her. She left with him days later, leaving a note in the kitchen of the house she was living in. No one looked for her. No one called, as if she had never existed. They moved into a small apartment on the outskirts. At first, everything was laughter, passion, freedom. Julian took her for walks, bought her clothes, promised her a future. But little by little, the bubble deflated. The first shouts came when she broke a glass. Later, when she didn't have dinner ready on time. Jealousy became an excuse to check her phone, her clothes, her schedule. Julian didn't want her to work or study or go out alone. At first, he said it was because he loved her so much that he wanted her all to himself. The world is full of bad intentions, Claire. I don't want you to go out and have someone steal you away. I have you by my side now. I don't need anything else, he said while caressing her face with feigned tenderness. After a year, she no longer went out, she no longer had friends, she no longer had her own money. She only had what he decided to give her, an allowance as if she were a daughter, not a wife. When they got married, Claire felt it would bring security, but the ring was just another form of confinement. Mrs. Estelle, Julian's mother, never accepted her. From the first day, she treated her with condescension, as if Claire were a stain on her son's reputation. And where exactly did you come from? She asked the first time they met. Claire lowered her head. She felt shame rise up her neck like a flame. St. Clara's orphanage, she replied bluntly, knowing it would only fuel the cruelty. Ah, that makes sense, the woman said. And from then on, she called her the stray. Claire endured. She endured for love, for fear, for the children. She endured when Julian came home smelling of another woman. She endured when he asked her to stop eating so much because her clothes no longer fit like they used to. She endured when her mother-in-law told her she didn't know how to raise children, that they were rude because she came from the streets. She endured until she stopped feeling. Now everything had a different color, a different weight. Now, in the silence of that night, after seeing Julian pour poison into her soup, Claire understood that she had never been loved. She had been chosen, yes, but as one chooses someone who has nowhere else to go. Julian had chosen her because she was malleable, submissive, alone. A woman without a network, without a family, without a past. A perfect piece for a long-term plan. Claire wondered how many years this man had been weaving a web to slowly destroy her in the kitchen. The next day, while the children played in the living room and Julian talked on the phone with the insurance company, Claire washed the dishes with mechanical movements. Feeling better? He asked, approaching from behind. She didn't turn around. Yes, better. You were very quiet last night. You scared me a little. I know it was hard with my mom, but I was worried about you, he said in a calculated, sweet voice. I'm fine, she replied, measuring every word. Julian came closer, put his hands on her shoulders. I miss you when you get locked up in yourself, you know. Claire felt a shiver. She had heard that exact phrase before, the same one he used when he made her quit her job, when he asked her not to study nursing because he could support her. I'll get over it, she said, turning slowly to look him in the eyes. For a second, she thought she saw a shadow cross his face, a doubt, a suspicion, but he smiled. I hope so, because we need each other. That word, need, he used like a chain. That night, while looking through an old box of memories stored in the highest cabinet of the closet, Claire found a folded letter. She didn't remember ever seeing it before. The envelope had no sender, just her name written in clumsy handwriting. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside were a few lines. If you ever remember your true name, look in room 17 of the orphanage. They saved what belonged to you there. Don't let them erase you. The letter had no date, no signature, but the handwriting felt unsettlingly familiar. Claire felt the floor move. Her true name? What did that mean? Who had written it? How long had it been there? She went to the mirror. She stared at herself. She repeated her name in a low voice. Claire, Claire, Claire. And for the first time, that word sounded empty, as if it didn't belong to her. She hid the letter under her pillow. She didn't want anyone to find it. That night, she dreamed of the closed door of the orphanage. She dreamed of room 17. She dreamed of a girl's voice calling her from the other side. When she woke up, she knew she couldn't keep burying the past. She had to go back to where it all began, even if it hurt, even if she found truths she didn't want to know. But first, she had to keep pretending. Julian was watching her more than usual. He measured her gestures. He offered her coffee in the mornings, bread and butter, things he hadn't done in years. He was trying to rebuild the image of an ideal husband. "Don't you want to go out for a bit? Take the kids to the park." "I'm tired," she replied without looking up. She knew he was watching her. She knew he was suspicious, but he had no proof. Not yet. And meanwhile, inside, the girl she once was waking up, the one who learned to hide scars, the one who survived abandonment, the one who still didn't know her true name. That girl was back, and she came with a hunger for truth. Claire no longer walked with the same steps. There was a new rhythm to her breathing, as if something dormant inside her had awakened with a thirst. It wasn't rage she felt. It was something older, deeper. A mix of suspicion, instinct, and a certainty that stuck to her skin. She was surrounded by lies. The days following Mrs. Estelle's death were a carefully executed choreography by Julian. Calls to the insurance company, meetings with lawyers, calculated tears, public hugs. The grieving widower played his part to perfection. Claire watched him in silence. She smiled when she had to, nodded in meetings, and kept her gaze lowered. She pretended to be dazed by grief, as he expected, but inside, her mind never stopped digging. One night, when Julian was sleeping soundly, Claire got up without a sound. She walked to the office he had turned into his private sanctuary. She rarely entered there. Julian had made it clear from the beginning. "This is my space. Work, accounting, important papers. I don't want the kids or you to come in. It's not about distrust, it's about order." A lie disguised as control. And for years she had respected it. Until now. She carefully searched through the folders on the desk. Nothing useful. Bills, bank statements, legal documents. She went to the filing cabinet. The third drawer was locked. Claire knelt down. She checked under the desk, in the drawers, among books. Nothing. Then she looked at the wall clock. She had a hunch. She carefully took it down. Behind it, taped on, she found a small brass key. She took it without trembling and went back to the filing cabinet. The lock clicked. Inside, everything was perfectly organized. Labeled folders, sealed envelopes, and a black lockbox with a password. She ignored the box for now. The first thing she checked was a folder marked private. Inside, she found a copy of her birth certificate. It was her name, her signature, but the address wasn't the current one or the orphanage's. It was an address she didn't recognize, and the date of issue was recent. Underneath, a life insurance form. Beneficiary Julian. Amount, $750,000. Activation date, 4 weeks before her mother-in-law's death. Claire swallowed hard, feeling her pulse quicken. There was also a printed will with Mrs. Estelle's signature, but it had been modified. It stated that in the event of her passing, everything inherited from her deceased husband, properties, stocks, accounts, would pass to her only son. To her daughter-in-law Claire, she left the honor of having been a part of her family. Her blood boiled. She closed the folder carefully, put everything back exactly as she found it, re-hid the key behind the clock, and went back to her room. She didn't sleep that night. She thought of the years of servitude disguised as marriage, of every sacrifice she made to maintain a house that was never hers, of how her silence had been misinterpreted as ignorance, and of how each of them had woven that web to slowly ensnare her without her noticing. Days later, Claire made sure Julian was out of the house to do another check. This time on the lockbox. She knew she couldn't open it without help, so she took photos of the model, the serial number, and consulted a locksmith who owed a favor to a friend from her youth. She asked for discretion. The man didn't ask questions. 2 days later, Claire opened the box. Inside were envelopes with cash, notary documents, and a small blue notebook. That notebook contained something that froze her. Dates, amounts, women's names, a list of expenses at hotels, gifts, even transfers made to an unknown account. But that wasn't the worst part. There were printed messages, email conversations between Julian and someone named C. Claire has no idea, she believes everything. I feel bad for her, but she can't continue to be an obstacle. I'm sure she doesn't suspect. Believe me, there's no one easier to manipulate than someone who came from nothing. There were names, dates, details. She began to doubt everyone. Who is C? A lover? An accomplice? She turned off the office light, closed everything, put the copies in an envelope, and hid it in the bottom of her closet in an old boot. Hours later, while pretending to be in the kitchen looking up recipes for Sunday dinner, she heard her sister-in-law's voice in the living room. Are you sure Claire doesn't suspect? That fool trusts us blindly, Julian said with a voice full of arrogance. Claire approached silently. The ajar door allowed her to see Julian sitting with a glass in his hand, smiling with that arrogance she knew so well. She doesn't realize anything. Mom's death came early, but it actually did us a favor. And if she talks, Claire, if she didn't talk when Mom spat in her face that she was a servant, do you think she will now? Believe me, she's broken. We just have to let her talk to God and follow the plan. Did you activate the payment? Yes. The insurance will take time, but there's another transfer on its way. We have to close this fast. Claire backed away carefully, her heart pounding in her chest. She returned to the kitchen, took the potato peeler knife, and gripped it tightly. She stared at it for an eternal second. Then she let it go. Not like this. Not that way. Not yet. The next day, she took advantage of Julian being out to meet a client to check an old box that Mrs. Estelle had kept in her closet. Inside, she found dozens of letters, but among them, one with her sister's name. The envelope was crumpled, dated 7 years ago. Claire opened it. Dear Claire, I've tried to find you. I looked for you in all the records. They told me you were adopted by a good family. I just want to see you. I'm in London. I work at a bookstore. If you ever remember anything about us, find me. The letter was unopened. Mrs. Estelle had never given it to her or mentioned it existed. Claire felt a shiver. She had spent years believing her sister was dead. She remembered her only in fragments, like a blurry face in the fog. But now she knew she was alive and that they had been separated on purpose. The lie was deeper than she imagined. She carefully put the letter away, folded it into 4, and hid it between the pages of a Bible that no one used. Her heart pounded fiercely. There were no more doubts. Everything was connected. Julian, her sister-in-law, her mother-in-law. The perfect family was just a carefully constructed facade to keep her domesticated. They didn't love her. They needed her as a servant, as an incubator, as a trophy, as a victim. That same night at dinner, Claire looked at Julian with a new gaze. It was no longer fear. It was strategy. She knew she had to wait. She knew that every false step could cost her dearly, but inside, something new was growing. She was no longer the broken girl from the orphanage or the submissive wife. Now she was a woman at war. Have you thought about what I said about the trip to Brighton? He asked as he cut his meat. What trip? The one I suggested for you to clear your head. You and the kids could go to my uncle's house. A few days without stress. Claire looked at him. She smiled softly. Of course. That sounds nice. He nodded, satisfied. He didn't suspect she already knew what he was planning. He wanted to get her away, to separate her, to take control, and maybe make that trip her last. But this time she wouldn't allow it. That night, she wrote everything down in a notebook. Dates, names, suspicions, copies of documents. She put it all in a folder titled, If Anything Happens to Me. She hid it under a loose floorboard in her closet. No one would look there. No one knew that in that house, the only one who had been invisible all this time was the one who now saw more clearly than anyone. Claire no longer remained silent. Although she didn't speak, she shouted with her steps, with her silence full of intention. With every move, she wove the counterattack. Vengeance would not be fast, it would be surgical, cold, just. And when the moment came, no one would see the blow coming, because the disguise of submissiveness had worked for so long that everyone had forgotten that even the weakest prey can become lethal. The dawn filtered through the curtains of the bedroom when Claire felt the weight of the vigil in her eyes. She hadn't slept. She had spent the night reviewing every detail, every conversation heard through ajar doors, every document found in Julian's office. The silence in the house seemed denser than ever, as if the walls held secrets that were about to burst. The children were still sleeping, unaware of the approaching storm, and Julian snored softly in the other room. Claire decided to get up. The day had come when the truth would seek her out, even if she didn't want it to. The phone's ring startled her. A firm but contained male voice introduced himself as Dr. Adams, the medical examiner in charge of Mrs. Estelle's autopsy. He requested to see her personally. He said there were findings that couldn't be communicated over the phone, that they required privacy. Claire accepted, though her stomach twisted with the intuition that what she was about to hear was not simple bureaucracy. She arrived at the hospital 2 hours later with a dark scarf covering her face. She didn't want awkward encounters or pitying glances. The hallway leading to the medical examiner's office smelled of disinfectant and dampness. The doctor greeted her with a serious expression. He was an older man with gray hair and tired eyes. Thank you for coming, Mrs. Claire. Please have a seat. She did, her hands clasped to hide their trembling. I called you because in your mother-in-law's autopsy results, we've found some things that seem strange to me. Strange? She asked, forcing her voice to be steady. Yes, you see. Your mother-in-law did not die of poisoning. The toxicological analysis showed traces of the compound in her system, yes, but in a minimal amount, insufficient to cause the outcome you witnessed at dinner. The actual cause of her death was an advanced brain tumor. She had at most a couple of weeks to live. Did you know that? Claire looked at him with wide eyes, feeling the blood rush to her temples. She couldn't answer immediately. She just shook her head gently. No, she never told me anything. Her voice came out muted, a mere thread. Curious. A disease of this type doesn't go unnoticed. Intense pain, fainting, vision loss. Someone must have noticed something. The doctor watched her fixedly, as if looking for a crack in her expression. Claire said nothing. She remained motionless, trying to process what she had just heard. The poison had not killed Estelle. What had destroyed her came from within, a silent disease that was slowly taking her. And Julian, in his haste to inherit, had merely accelerated a destiny that was already written. She couldn't help but think how ironic it all was. The poison wasn't justice, it was fate. But the doctor wasn't finished. There's another finding I must mention. During the autopsy, we performed a routine genetic analysis because there were inconsistencies in her previous medical documents, and the result was unexpected. We found biological matches with you. Claire froze. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. What do you mean? She finally asked, her voice trembling. The doctor adjusted his glasses and spoke with caution. What I mean is that, according to the analysis, Mrs. Estelle wasn't just your mother-in-law. She was your biological mother. The silence became unbearable. Claire felt a vertigo so intense that for a moment she thought she would faint. Her heart pounded furiously, and her thoughts stumbled over each other in a whirlwind of images. Her childhood in the orphanage, Estelle's cold stares, her words filled with venom, the way she had scorned her for years. The woman who had made her feel most like an intruder was, in fact, the one who had given her life. The doctor continued as if he were hammering each word into an open wound. The records show that you were admitted to an orphanage as a baby. There are indications that you were given up irregularly. I don't know how to say this gently, but it appears that Mrs. Estelle was part of a network of illegal adoptions, or something worse. It's likely that she sold you. Claire put her hands to her face. She wanted to cry but couldn't. The only thing she felt was a dry, searing fury that spread through her chest. The woman who had condemned her to a childhood of abandonment, who had called her the stray, who had humiliated her at every opportunity, was the very one who had given birth to her and sold her like merchandise. The doctor, uncomfortable, cleared his throat. I don't know how much you knew about your history. I'm just giving you the facts. The rest you'll have to investigate yourself. Claire slowly stood up. Her voice was hoarse. Thank you, doctor. You were right. This couldn't have been known over the phone. She left the hospital with heavy steps. The cold street air hit her full force. She walked aimlessly for several minutes until she stopped in front of a church. She went inside. The place was empty except for a couple of lit candles. She sat on the last bench, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. I was raised by my executioners, and I slept with the biggest executioner, she whispered into the void with a voice that seemed not to belong to her. The words tasted like iron. A mother who sold her, a husband who planned to kill her, an in-law family that never accepted her because they knew too much. Her whole world was a macabre theater in which she had always been the puppet. The poison in the soup was nothing compared to the poison they had injected into her soul since she was born. An old woman lit candles in silence. Claire watched her and for a moment wanted to approach, to confess everything, to ask for advice, but she didn't. She stood up, walked to the altar, and lit a candle. She didn't ask for justice. She didn't ask for vengeance. She only asked for clarity because amidst so many lies, the truth was the only lighthouse she could cling to. That night, upon returning home, she found Julian sitting in the living room, his gaze fixed on the blank TV screen. He seemed lost in thought. When he saw her come in, he smiled softly. Where were you? I went for a walk. I needed some air. And you didn't tell me anything? He asked in a tone that sounded more like a reproach than a concern. You were busy. I didn't want to bother you. He watched her for a few seconds as if trying to read her soul. Then he got up, put an arm around her, and kissed her on the forehead. I love you, Claire. Don't ever forget that. She closed her eyes. The contact was repulsive. She couldn't stop thinking about what she had just discovered. This man knew she was Estelle's daughter. He had known all along. He had chosen her because she was the perfect prey, or because she was actually part of an even more twisted plan. She went to bed with those questions hammering in her head. She didn't sleep. She listened to Julian's breathing beside her, regular calm. And every time he exhaled, she felt an invisible poison filling the room. The next morning, Claire looked for the letter she had found days ago, the one from her sister. She read it again with a heavy heart. Her sister was alive. They had been separated on purpose. She had also been sold. Where was she now? That letter was the only real clue she had to reconstruct her true story. As she made breakfast, Julian entered the kitchen and sat across from her. "I've been thinking," he said in a calm voice. "Maybe we should move. Change cities, change the environment. This place is already full of painful memories." Claire looked at him. The idea didn't sound like consolation. It sounded like a maneuver. To get her away from the few clues she had, to isolate her even more. "Maybe," she replied, feigning indifference. He smiled, satisfied, as if he had won something. Claire smiled too, but inside, her soul was burning. She was no longer the broken woman who accepted everything without question. Now she was a woman who knew that blood cried out, that the truth ran through her veins like a scream, and that sooner or later, that scream would be heard, even if it shattered everything in its path. In the following days, Claire submerged herself in a silence that was not the same as before. It wasn't the submission of a wife who kept quiet out of fear, but the silence of someone who plans with patience. In Julian's eyes, she seemed dejected, almost resigned. She cooked in silence, answered with short phrases, and spent long hours locked in her room. For him, it was the reflection of a woman dulled by her mother-in-law's death. For her, it was the perfect mask behind which she was nurturing her new identity. When she was alone, the pain pierced her. She would lock herself in the bathroom. She would turn on the shower to let the sound of the water hide her screams. She would cry with all her might, as if she wanted to expel from her body all the years of humiliation, the rotten secrets, the betrayal disguised as love. She would tear up photographs one by one, the ones where Julian smiled, showing feigned happiness. The paper pieces fell to the floor and mixed with her tears, but when she looked up, she would find her reflection in the mirror, with red eyes, with disheveled hair. And in that reflection, she began to recognize another woman, one who didn't completely break, one who still had the strength to get up. At night, when her children were asleep, she would sit on the edge of the bed and watch them tenderly. The little one breathed calmly, hugging his teddy bear, while the older one often murmured incomprehensible words in her dreams. Claire wondered what legacy she would leave them. The question haunted her like a shadow. What will I leave them? The example of a weak mother or the legacy of a woman who woke up? She whispered softly, as if the answer could come from the sky. The tears flowed again, but this time with a mixture of rage and determination. She understood that her life no longer belonged only to her. Her children looked to her as a lighthouse, and that lighthouse could not go out. She had to become a light that would teach them not to be trampled on, not to repeat history. It was then that she decided to document everything. Every finding, every clue, every piece of evidence of Julian's betrayal and his family's. She kept copies of the insurance documents, noted dates and places of meetings, and recorded conversations with her phone hidden in an apron pocket. She knew that a complaint wouldn't be enough. Julian had contacts, money, influence. She needed something bigger, something that would expose them to everyone. A public downfall with no possibility of hiding behind lawyers or bribes. One afternoon, while pretending to organize the kitchen, she heard Julian on the phone in the living room. His voice was low, but the tension was perceptible in every word. "Everything is ready. I just need the last document signed. She doesn't suspect anything, don't worry. Claire will never be a problem. She has no idea what's coming." Claire gritted her teeth, recorded every word from her phone's app, and stored it away like gold. She already had several hours of conversations that showed Julian was planning something dark. She archived it all in an encrypted folder on a USB drive that she hid under her son's mattress, convinced that this would be the last place Julian would check. Her next step was to contact someone she could trust. She remembered Laura, a journalist she had met at a writing workshop years ago. They weren't close friends, but she knew Laura was incorruptible, that she had uncovered cases of corruption and abuse. Claire called her with a trembling voice, asking for a meeting. They met at a discreet cafe on the outskirts of the city. When they sat face to face, Claire lowered her voice. "Do you want a story that will shake the country? I have one." Laura looked at her skeptically at first, but Claire's expression, the way her hands trembled as she pulled out documents, audio files, and photos, dispelled any doubt. Claire told her everything, from the poisoned soup to the autopsy findings, including the life insurance and the web of manipulation she had discovered. Laura listened without interrupting, taking frantic notes, and at the end she just said, "This is much bigger than I imagined. If we publish this, your husband and his circle will have nowhere to hide. But you have to be ready. They will want to silence you." "They already tried once," Claire replied with an unsettling serenity. "This time they won't get the chance." Laura's face hardened, understanding the gravity of the situation. She promised to protect the evidence and act with caution. Claire, relieved, felt that for the first time in years she wasn't alone. She was no longer the woman who cried in hiding. Now she was someone who was weaving a web of truth to trap those who had played with her life. Her transformation also began to reflect in her appearance. One morning, she looked in the mirror and picked up a pair of scissors. She cut her long hair that Julian had always told her to keep because it looked more feminine. She left it at her shoulders, light, rebellious. It was a small act but full of symbolism. Every lock that fell was one less chain. When Julian saw her, his reaction was immediate. "What did you do?" he exclaimed with disdain. "With that haircut, you look like a different person. I told you 1,000 times that long hair suits you." Claire looked at him coldly. "That's the idea, to be a different person." He laughed, thinking it was just a whim. He didn't suspect that the phrase hid a much deeper truth, because Claire had started to look for documents about her real identity. The name on her birth certificate didn't match the orphanage records. Investigating with Laura's help, she discovered a forgotten file that confirmed what she already suspected. Her original name wasn't Claire, it was Lucille. When she read it, she felt a shudder. It was like recovering a lost piece of her soul. Lucille, that name had a weight, a strength that Claire had never felt, but she wouldn't use it yet. Not yet. First, she had to finish what she had started. First, she had to destroy Julian, just as he had tried to destroy her. The following nights, she spent organizing evidence and drafting a plan. She felt as if her entire past was making sense, as if every tear, every humiliation, every silence kept was converging toward this moment. The broken woman had died. What was emerging now was someone who would not settle for just surviving. She wanted justice, and she was willing to pay the price. As she wrote in her secret notebook, she made a promise to herself. She would no longer allow them to manipulate her. She would no longer let them decide for her. The submissive Claire was being left behind. Lucille, though still in the shadows, was beginning to breathe, and that Lucille carried the fire of a truth that would soon set everything around her on fire. The day she decided to act arrived with a different kind of cold. It wasn't the temperature, but the kind that precedes a storm. Claire, or rather Lucille, had spent weeks preparing every detail. The evidence was sorted, duplicated, and stored in different places so no one could erase it. Laura, the journalist, had been key in helping her structure the plan. What was about to happen was not a fit of anger. It was a trial without judges, a banquet where the truth would be the main course. She invited the family to a dinner. She feigned a desire for reconciliation after Mrs. Estelle's death, that she wanted to honor the memory of the deceased with a gathering where everyone could share memories. Julian accepted with a smile, believing she was finally returning to her role as the submissive wife. The sister-in-law also confirmed her attendance. Some aunts and uncles and cousins were invited. No one suspected a thing. No one imagined that these walls, the same ones that had witnessed so much silence, would now bear witness to the demolition of an empire of lies. Claire installed small cameras in the corners of the living and dining rooms. She did it with steady hands, knowing the recording would be the definitive proof that the media would receive later. She checked the microphones, tested the angles, and hid the devices behind flower vases and clocks. No one would notice. The journalist had lent her some of the equipment. When the guests arrived, the house filled with voices, feigned laughter, and tense hugs. Julian walked like a king on his throne, raising glasses, hugging his sister, making jokes that seemed befitting of a noble and generous man. Claire watched him in silence, like someone watching an actor perform a play whose script he no longer controlled. Dinner began normally. The children had been sent to a trusted neighbor's house. Claire didn't want them to witness the storm that was about to break out. Everyone ate, talked about trivialities, and remembered the late Estelle with sweet words that didn't match the venom that woman had exuded in life. Claire served the dishes calmly, feigning her usual docility. Suddenly, she placed a folder on the table. The sound of the cardboard hitting the tablecloth interrupted the conversation. All eyes turned to her. Julian raised his eyebrows, confused. "I want you all to listen to something and stop being fooled by appearances. This dinner isn't to honor anyone's memory, it's to tear off the masks. Silence fell heavily. The sister-in-law laughed nervously. "What's wrong with you now, Claire?" She opened the folder and took out several pages. She spread them out on the table in front of everyone. "Here are copies of Mrs. Estelle's modified will. This document proves that Julian manipulated the inheritance to keep everything. And here's the life insurance policy he took out in my name weeks before her death." Julian stood up from his chair, furious. "This is absurd. Stop making things up." Claire looked him directly in the eyes with a cold calm. "Making things up? Listen to this." She took out her phone, connected it to the speaker, and played one of the recorded audio files. Julian's voice filled the room. "Everything is ready. I just need the last document signed. She doesn't suspect anything. Claire will never be a problem." The people present looked at each other, stunned. The sister-in-law turned pale. Claire continued. "And there's more. Conversations with his sister where they mock me, planning how to get rid of me, how to make my death look like a heart attack." The sister-in-law tried to get up, but Claire slammed her open palm on the table. "You sit down. You're in on this too." The aunts and uncles and cousins murmured, confused in disbelief. Julian was sweating, his smile gone, replaced by a look of uncontrolled rage. "You wanted it to look like a heart attack? Well, let it look like what it is, a failed murder attempt." The murmuring turned into a chaos of voices. Julian tried to approach Claire, but she took a step back. At that moment, sirens were heard outside. Several patrol cars surrounded the house. The police entered through the front door. Laura, the journalist, had handed over all the evidence hours before, and the authorities had prepared the operation in secret. Julian tried to run towards the back exit, but 2 agents tackled him to the ground. "This is a setup. She's crazy. You have no proof," he shouted as they handcuffed him. Claire looked at him with dry eyes. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. Suddenly, a female voice resonated from the entrance. "Oh, there is proof. And I got some of it myself." Everyone turned to the door. A middle-aged woman with dark hair pulled back in a bun and a firm gaze entered, accompanied by an officer. Claire's heart skipped a beat. That woman had the same eyes as her, the same features on her chin. "Sister?" she whispered, incredulous. The woman nodded with contained tears. "Lucille, it's me. I was never dead. I've been working all these years, infiltrated in human trafficking networks. I had to do it in silence without leaving a trace. And while I did it, I was looking for you." Claire covered her mouth with her hands. The truth was unfolding with an impossible force to contain. Her missing sister wasn't just alive. She had become a key piece in unmasking the network that had used them since they were girls. The woman approached, took Claire's hands, and spoke firmly. "I was the one who left the letter in your house. I couldn't come to you until I was sure you were ready. Now you are. Together, we're going to close this circle." The in-laws were in shock. Some were crying, others were shouting. The sister-in-law was escorted away by agents, accused of complicity. Julian, on the floor, was cursing at everyone. Claire didn't cry, she didn't shout, she just watched as the masks fell one by one. Inside her, the calm was strange, almost foreign. There was no longer room for fear. When the police left with the detainees, Laura approached and whispered, "You've just changed your destiny and that of many others. This doesn't end here, but the first step has been taken." Claire nodded. The broken woman no longer existed. Lucille was standing, her soul awakened. The room was empty with untouched plates on the table. The dinner had been a banquet of broken masks, an altar where truth had devoured lies. Claire looked at the place one last time. She felt neither pain nor guilt. Only the certainty that justice, the one that had been denied her all her life, had finally begun to be written with her name. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of trials, statements, newspaper headlines, and cameras in her face. Julian was brought before the courts with evidence so solid that not even his most expensive lawyers could alter his fate. His sister-in-law also faced charges, and some cousins who had signed fraudulent documents had to testify. Claire was called to testify several times, and each time she spoke, the judges and prosecutors listened in silence to the voice of a woman who had been silent for years, but who was now the owner of her truth. It wasn't easy. At each hearing, she relived the pain. In each courtroom, she felt the stares of the curious, some with pity, others with morbid interest. On the streets, strangers would approach her to pat her on the back or ask for photos. The journalist Laura turned her story into a series of reports that sparked a national debate about domestic violence, human trafficking networks, and family corruption. Claire never sought to be a symbol, but suddenly she became one, and with every interview, with every microphone in front of her, she repeated the same thing. Silence kills. The truth is uncomfortable, but it saves. Months passed. The house where she had lived for so many years became an impossible place to inhabit. The memories weighed more than the walls. She decided to sell it. With the money, she paid off debts and saved enough to start over. One morning, she woke her children with unexpected news. We're going to a place where the sea will hug us and no one will remember us for what we suffered. The little girl with big eyes asked with innocence, "Where, Mommy?" Claire smiled. To a town by the sea, where the wind smells of freedom. There were no long goodbyes. The move was quick. The truck left loaded with few belongings. Clothes, some toys, a few selected photos and documents. The rest was left behind as if it had never existed. The coastal town welcomed them with a different kind of air. Cobblestone streets, houses painted white with blue windows, the sound of waves crashing against the rocks. It was a small place where everyone knew each other, but where no one judged her for her past. There, Claire decided to close a chapter. She went to the civil registry and asked to have her true name restored. The clerk looked at her in surprise when she read the file. "Are you sure? Changing your legal name is a big step." "It's not a change, it's a return," she replied firmly. "I want to be Lucille again." When she signed the document and saw her true name written, a strange peace enveloped her, as if she could finally recognize herself in the mirror. Lucille, an identity that had been hidden under years of lies. The days in the town began to follow a different rhythm. She took the children to school, walked on the beach, and bought bread at the corner bakery. She learned to listen to the sea as if it were a confessional open day and night. Sometimes she would sit on the sand, close her eyes, and let the wind remind her that she was alive. One ordinary afternoon, while her children played with a ball near the shore, an unknown boy approached. He was about 8 years old, with bare feet and an envelope in his hand. "Are you Lucille?" he asked with a shy voice. She looked at him, surprised. "Yes." "Why?" The boy held out the envelope. "They told me to give this to you." Claire took it confused. The little boy ran back to the sand without further explanation. Lucille's heart began to beat fast. She broke the seal of the envelope and took out a handwritten letter. She recognized the handwriting. It was Estelle's. She read it in a low voice with trembling hands. "I couldn't give you love, but I gave you strength. I'm sorry. I regret it every day. I never had the courage to look at you and tell you the truth. I gave you up because I thought it was for the best, but I was wrong. I made you carry a destiny that wasn't yours. I hope one day you find in yourself what I never knew how to give you. Forgive me if you can. I'll always be with you, even if you don't name me." Inside the envelope, along with the letter, there was a small silver chain. A tiny pendant with a name engraved on it hung from it. Lucille. Tears began to slide down her cheeks. It wasn't forgiveness she felt. It was a mixture of relief and rage. She couldn't erase what Estelle had done to her or get back the years of abandonment, but she also couldn't deny that those words, late and clumsy, carried a weight of sincerity. She sat on the sand, squeezing the little chain between her fingers. Her children ran towards her. "What's that, Mommy?" She looked at them with a calm smile. "It's my name. And our new life." The little girl stroked the chain and said, "It's pretty." Lucille put it around her neck and looked at the horizon. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel afraid to be alone. She was no longer the woman who cried hidden in a bathroom, or the wife trapped in a poisoned marriage. She was a mother, a reunited sister, a survivor who had made her pain a bridge to freedom. The sea roared like an endless applause. Lucille stood up, walked into the water, and let the waves wash over her feet. She felt that each rush of water was erasing an invisible scar. She smiled not because everything was resolved, but because she finally understood that life didn't owe her anything. She was the one who had to live it, scars and all. As she returned to her children, she hugged them tightly. "You don't have to fear anything anymore. We are safe here." The calm after the storm had arrived, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was a silence full of a future. And in that silence, Lucille knew that she had been reborn. What did you think of this story? Many people, like Claire, are fighting silent battles every day. Our hope is that her voice also resonated within you. If this story touched your heart, share it. Make more people feel accompanied. Be a part of the change. Tell us in the comments what you would have done in her place. What city are you watching us from? Reading your comments makes us feel closer to you. And if you haven't already, subscribe and hit the bell icon. Every one of your gestures is a sign that these stories must continue to be told. Don't go yet. Our next heartwarming story is already appearing on your screen. Click on any of them and continue exploring this universe of real, moving, and necessary stories. Thank you for being here. Thank you for feeling with us. We send you a huge hug wherever you are. See you in the next one.